On today's episode of The Golden Bolt, I'm looking at Spyro the Dragon, a game I played a little bit as a kid, but a series that I never really learned to love. I know just the guy for this. Hey, MykonosFan, you want to review Spyro 1 with me?
Oh yes, I am definitely in.
Why are you Yakuza right now?
I don't have a camera.
Okay, cool, I guess. Let's take a look at Spyro the Dragon.
私はこれを持っています。
The game begins with a television interview, of all things. Reporters are asking the Elder Dragons about the recent developments involving Nasty Nork, the leader of a rival species to the dragons called, well, Norks. Apparently he'd found a spell to turn the dragon's gems into soldiers for his army. The dragons as a result had banished him to another realm where somehow he gets really good TV reception. Although he's a little bit insulted by the dragons calling him stupid and saying he's not a threat to them, he mostly brushes that off. Once they call him ugly though, that's too far. He fires off a spell that turns every living dragon into stone statues. Well, all of them but one.
Looks like I've got some things to do.
These dragons are kind of dicks. There's no reason for them to brag about all the money they've got, or insult Nasty Nork if he's not a threat to them, but they just go and rub it in. Second, if Nasty had that power the entire time, why didn't he just use it earlier? After that...
Hold on, can we talk about that line for a second? Looks like I've got some things to do. Who says that? That's your badass catchphrase? Oh my god.
After that, there's not much story left, really. Spyro goes and saves the dragons, collects every single gem, and beats Nasty Nork. Game ends, and we live happily ever after. For about a year, until Spyro 2.
There really didn't need to be much overarching story though, because the characters themselves stand out to me. Each dragon that you save has his own personality and unique lines, and some of them are pretty funny. Sure, most of them are jerks even when saved, but still.
Since the plot is relatively shallow, I don't think I could possibly give Spyro a golden bolt for its story.
Buddy, the bolt thing is kind of my thing. Get back off. I don't think it does anything necessarily wrong, it's all just kind of there. The characters are somewhat charming, and I enjoyed what was there in terms of plot, so I would say a silver bolt is fair here.
Spyro is a late PS1 era 3D platformer. The reason I note that it's specifically a late PS1 platformer is the addition of the DualShock controller to the system. Before May 1998, all PS1 controllers had to use a D-pad for character movement. Released to combat the Nintendo 64's analog stick, the DualShock had not just one, but two sticks for players to use. And Spyro only used one of them. In fact, most games only used one. Developers were apparently afraid of the right analog stick. But hey, full analog character movement is at least better than nothing.
This analog movement gives Spyro an immediate edge over most of the earlier PS1 platformers. On top of this, he can jump using the X button and glide through the air by tapping X again in the middle of a jump. By pressing circle, he can shoot fire out of his mouth, and by pressing square, he can break into a full sprint and charge at his enemies.
The camera is controlled by pressing the L2 or R2 buttons, although as was common at the time and for a few years after this, the camera is inverted. Also, while we're talking the shoulder buttons, by pressing L1 or R1, Spyro can do the sear dodge roll, which is absolutely pointless.
The controls are mostly pitch perfect for a platformer, although the camera does like to jerk around in my experience. I set the camera to active in the options menu, so that it focuses itself behind Spyro to mitigate this a bit, but that didn't completely stop the problems. Additionally, there are times when Spyro must glide from one platform to another, and the actual jump that you need to make is just a tad bit precise for my liking. If you so much as just barely graze the top of the ledge with your toes, you're gonna fall out of that glide, and you better hope there's land below you when you do.
Other than that, the controls are great, like you said. I never found myself running into enemies because of imprecise controls or taking unavoidable hits due to poor mechanics. Thankfully, the game is very forgiving, because of this little dragonfly named Sparks that follows Spyro around. He's helpful for a couple reasons. The first of which is that he'll pick up nearby gems when you run by them, which is very handy in a 3D space. He's also an indicator of Spyro's current health. Yellow signifies that you're fully healthy, blue means you have 3 hit points left, green means you have 2, and when Sparks is gone, you're only one more hit away from death. You can refill Sparks' health by killing these fodder creatures spread throughout each level, be they sheep or chickens or toads or anything else. If you do die, there's a life mechanic that will restart you at the nearest checkpoint.
Before I touch on those checkpoints, I do want to note one thing. Spyro is far more than just a platforming game, it is a collectathon platformer, the kind that was ever so popular in the late 1990s.
Sprinkled throughout each level are hundreds of gems of varying color and value that Spyro can collect to try and refill the dragon's gem hoard.
Not that you ever actually see that hoard, the gems you collect are just a number in this game.
Yeah, I do wish you could see the hoard or get some idea of what all your work is building toward. They're fun to collect in the moment, but ultimately the process feels a bit hollow in retrospect.
Some gems are hidden inside enemies, others are hidden inside chests or containers of some sort, and so on. Red gems are worth 1, green are worth 2, blue are 5, yellow are 10, and purple are worth 25. Not gonna lie, my inner Zelda fan was constantly thrown off by the green gem not being the lowest in denomination. And while we're talking about color, Sparks' color scheme really bugs me. Why is green the closest to death? That's just counterintuitive.
In addition to gems are the dragons that you can rescue from their stone encasements by stepping on the platforms they're standing on, and in addition, there are 12 dragon eggs in certain levels that are held by these speedy Jawa looking thieves.
Kind of like the gems, these eggs are just there for you to collect, and they don't even exist after World 3, they just sort of stop. Did Nasty Nork get hungry or something? In total, there are 80 dragons that you can save, spread across 6 different overworlds, and 12,000 gems to collect.
Or is it 14,000?
Every world follows a specific theme based on the type of dragons that live in each, from the peaceful, grassy home of the artisans to the magnificent, otherworldly home of the magic crafters. Each area has sets of enemies inhabiting the worlds. Certain enemies can only be killed by certain attacks. Big enemies typically need to be beaten with fire, enemies with armor need to be charged into, and so on. You need to be on your toes the entire game, or else you're probably going to die a lot.
Speaking of which, each time you set foot on a dragon platform, you're setting a checkpoint for yourself if you die. You do have to step on the platform again to permanently save your progress, keep that in mind. If you don't make sure to directly save, you'll lose any sort of collection progress you've made since your last save. The focus here is explicitly on collecting things, not on the platforming itself, which works well because the platforming isn't always that much to write home about.
The level designs are insanely varied, almost to a fault.
With over 24 unique levels in this game, I honestly can't say that more than 2 or 3 of those levels blend together. However, at a certain point the levels begin to overstay their welcome because of this constant effort by Insomniac to change things up. Some abilities are used more often, like the supercharge that speeds Spyro up, but others, like this Fairy Kiss, are only used once or twice, simply as a gimmick to make one level stand out from another. I love a lot of these level gimmicks that Spyro 1 offers, like this level with these guys turning on and off their lanterns and the local creatures that transform and become invincible when the lights go out. But at a certain point, I just get fatigued by it all, especially as gems become more and more plentiful each level.
It would have been nice to see some gimmicks utilized more often than they were. When you do encounter them, it's usually just for one level and then they're quickly forgotten about. It may have been more beneficial to focus on and develop fewer level gimmicks than to constantly keep introducing new ones or not doing any at all in levels. It feels a bit overambitious.
Moreover, the further you get into this game, the more the game starts to rely on platforming as opposed to the simple, enjoyable feedback loop set up by collecting things, and the more the cracks start to show. Spyro is not the most precise mover in the world, so platforms are wide and give a lot of leeway for jumps. His jump is also really floaty to help compound this. As you get into those later levels though, the ones that rely more on the supercharge and quicker or more precise jumps, you see the flaws of the game come out.
Also, say it with me, Spyro fans, Treetops is just not fun. The game doesn't really get you used to controlling the supercharge before it demands you to be proficient with it, or to think about planning your paths out far in advance, which Treetops pretty much demands in order to collect everything in the level. It can feel like a sudden difficulty spike when you're expected to navigate twisting paths with the abilities demanding controls.
Speaking of weaknesses, on top of the 3 normal levels in each world, there's also a boss level and a flying level. The boss levels are nothing to write home about, they're mostly just chase the boss to the next platform and hit him and repeat sort of affairs.
This does a lot to make Spyro 1 feel like it has no real sense of a major villain. All of the bosses just kind of exist with no story purpose, you just find them and kill them. It's especially lame when you do finally meet Nasty Nork, who just lobs projectiles at you from up high as you try to get keys from egg thieves as part of the level's design. Then when you do unlock the way to get to him, he just runs from you and it becomes a chase portion to a final room where he's a cinch to defeat. It's weirdly anticlimactic, but in line with the way the rest of the bosses work, for better or worse.
The flying levels are some of the worst parts in the game. I distinctly remember hating these when I was young.
Yeah, it's very odd that these are the only areas of the game that place a timer on you, when just about every other facet of the game lets you work at your own leisure.
What's weird is that I personally feel these controls held up really well to the test of time despite hating them as a kid, and there's even a semblance of momentum to how Spyro flies. As you enter a nosedive, you feel him pick up speed, and that makes for some incredibly satisfying moments. I never did get why he can only fly in certain levels, but whatever.
The problem with these levels is that Spyro needs to complete 4 specific tasks in a certain time limit, and in some of the flying levels, it's tricky to complete all 4 individually using the most direct path.
In my experience, the immediately obvious path will almost never allow you to complete all 4, and thus get all the gems for that level. They're all just too spread out on the map for that to be possible. Instead, you'll need to mix and match tasks to maximize your efficiency in the allotted time, rather than do all the arches, then all the planes, or what have you. That said, the flying levels never took more than 4 or 5 tries for me, so they're not that big a pain. They're just a big step down in quality compared to the rest of the game. Despite some of the growing pains that Spyro 1 seems to have, this game brought out a love of collecting that I really haven't felt that often, putting it in the same category as Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and Mario Odyssey. I picked it up and I simply couldn't put it down. I beat the game in 3 sessions, each time getting exactly a third of the way to full completion. If I absolutely had to, I could make a handful of nitpicks. The actual act of collecting gems or eggs means absolutely nothing if you're not going for 100% completion. As a result, if you wanted to, you could just get the requisite number of dragons and be done with the game in just a couple of hours.
Spyro 1 may have some blemishes here and there, but it puts on a good amount of makeup to cover things up and make itself look pretty. However, because of a decent amount of significant design issues I had with Spyro, I've got to give the game a silver bolt. Moving along.
Why does everybody take my shtick? I'll be the first to admit, the visuals of PS1 games don't usually click with me. A lot of that has to do with the poor draw distance that the games often had. However, Spyro avoids that entirely. For the most part, you can see the entirety of a level at any given point, and for a collectathon, that is so important. The gems themselves do pop in and out depending on how far away Spyro is, but Insomniac added a little sparkle effect to help catch the player's eye at a distance. One thing I absolutely love is how well Spyro himself contrasts with the levels that you're playing on. Believe it or not, very early in development, everybody's favorite purple dragon was actually a green dragon.
That would change later on as the team realized he would be difficult to distinguish from the green grass, and so he was made purple instead.
A simple change like that not only led to one of the most iconic designs in video game history, it also, simply put, helped the game work.
The game is very striking visually for its time, with an excellent pastel color usage throughout the stages. The bright levels feel magical and the darker levels feel oppressive and moody. That combined with the great musical score from Stuart Copeland makes for a very memorable experience. He manages to weave the main theme of the game into a lot of the level's music, which really strengthens the score in my eyes. Or should I say ears. This is something that even the other Insomniac Spyro titles didn't do. There are also plenty of little touches that add charm, like the boom mic in the beginning cutscene.
What? Looks like I've got some things to do.
Spyro's head following the camera when you zoom in with the triangle button, and, oddly, even a reference to Parappa the Rapper.
You gotta believe!
Spyro 1 really is wrapped up in a wonderful package. I can't complain one bit about the soundtrack. Copeland honestly sets the tone for practically every level in the game. Well, with the exception of a level like High Cave that reuses the Treetop song for some reason. For all the beauty this game has audio-visually, it still does have some issues. They're mostly smaller things. For example, many of the dragons just repeat the same line after they're saved, which is a little bit of a shame when most of the dragons have a good piece of advice or a funny line. Also, at least with the PSN version of the game, Spyro 1 likes to slow down pretty often, and it's often a big distraction for me.
With the physical version, this issue isn't nearly as pronounced for some reason, but it does still chug every now and then.
Considering pretty much every PS1 game had slowdown problems at some point, I can't fault a game too much for that. Especially not with everything Insomniac did right here. If nothing else, the amazing soundtrack probably would have guaranteed this score anyway, but Spyro 1's presentation is getting a golden bolt. Despite being a little touch and go at points, I really clicked with Spyro 1. Perhaps the team was a bit too ambitious though, which just shows as the ideas stopped flowing during the later levels, but it's still enjoyable from start to finish.
And speaking as a Spyro fan, the first game holds up well to its sequels, although there are some clear improvements later down the road.
Hopefully they fix the gems or something, because my Zelda fan will love them forever if they do.
Yeah, about that.
The game will run you $5.99 digitally on the PS3, or $20 or so if you want to buy the physical PS1 release. I think at either of those prices, the game is pretty worth your time. It's a bit rough around the edges, but 20 years later, Spyro 1 still holds up remarkably well. On a different note, in just a couple days, this channel turns 2 on YouTube. So to celebrate the channel's 2nd birthday, I'm going to look at the very first game that I reviewed, again. Join me next time when I take a look at Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button. If you want to see more, make sure you subscribe. And as always, everybody, stay golden. Special thanks to my buddy MykonosFan for joining me on this video. If you're a fan of my reviews, you will definitely enjoy his, so make sure you check him out.
If for some reason you want more of my thoughts or interested in my opinions on PlayStation games, you should check out Learning to Love PlayStation over on my channel.